Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving deep into the appendicular skeleton. Look at this incredible 3D model right here. Focus on the femur. Today we're identifying every bone in the appendicular system. We'll cover the essentials, plus I'll show you the pro tips for distinguishing left from right using key bone markings.
Let's identify the bones of the pectoral girdle and the upper extremity. First, the pectoral girdle. We start with the clavicle. Look for the sternal end. That's the medial side that attaches to the sternum. On the opposite side is the acromial end, which is lateral. Now pay attention to this landmark, the conoid tubercle. This is located on the acromial end. It must face inferiorly to put the bone in its correct anatomical position. Next, the scapula. We have the acromion, which connects to the clavicle, and the coracoid process. This process is a key landmark. It must face anteriorly, pointing to the front of the body. At its base, you'll find the suprascapular notch. On the posterior side, the spine divides the bone into the supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa. On the deep, smooth side, we have the subscapular fossa. Finally, locate the glenoid cavity. This is your most important lateral landmark. It must face outward to articulate with the humerus. If the glenoid is lateral and the coracoid is anterior, you found your anatomical position.
Moving down to the arm, we have a single bone, the humerus. First, locate the head. This smooth, rounded surface must face medially to fit into the glenoid cavity. Just below it is the anatomical neck, the site of the old growth plate, and the surgical neck, a frequent spot for fractures. On the proximal end, identify the greater tubercle. It's the largest and sits most laterally. Next to it is the lesser tubercle, which faces medially. Key landmark. Between them is the intertubercular groove. This groove must face anteriorly. It's where your biceps tendon rests. Moving down the shaft, we find the deltoid tuberosity. Now let's look at the distal end. Find the trochlea. This pulley-shaped feature articulates with the ulna and must be positioned inferiorly, medially, and anteriorly. Beside it is the capitulum, which articulates with the radius. This is lateral and anterior. For final orientation, look at the epicondyles, the medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyle. On the front, you'll see the coronoid fossa and the radial fossa. But the ultimate giveaway for the back of the bone is the olecranon fossa. This deep pit is always posterior. If the flat side of the distal end is facing front and the big pit is in the back, you've got it.
Moving to the forearm, we have two bones, the radius and the ulna. First, the radius, the bone on the thumb side. Look for the circular head. This must be superior to articulate with the capitulum of the humerus. Below that is the neck, followed by the radial tuberosity. At the distal end, you'll find the styloid process and the ulnar notch where it meets the ulna. Next, the ulna. This bone is easy to orient because of the C-shaped trochlear notch. The top of that C is the olecranon process, which must face posteriorly. It forms the point of your elbow. The bottom lip is the coronoid process, which faces anteriorly. On the side, look for the radial notch. Here is the big trick. Unlike the radius, the head of the ulna is at the distal end. Finally, we have the styloid process of the ulna, which helps stabilize your wrist. Remember, radius head is up, ulna head is down.
Finally, we reach the hand, or the manus. First, we have the carpus, or the wrist, which consists of 8 small carpal bones arranged in 2 rows. To remember them from lateral to medial, we use the mnemonic, "Say loud to Pam, time to come home." In the proximal row, we have the scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and the P-shaped pisiform. Moving to the distal row, we find the trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and the hamate. Moving past the wrist, we have the metacarpals, numbered 1 through 5, which form the palm of your hand. And lastly, the phalanges, the 14 bones of the fingers. Each finger has a proximal, middle, and distal phalanx, except for the thumb, which lacks a middle phalanx. And that completes the upper extremity.
Now, let's examine the bones of the pelvic girdle, also known as the os coxae. Each hip bone is a single unit formed by the fusion of 3 distinct bones. First, the ilium. This is the large superior fan. Along the top edge is the iliac crest. Now, identify the 4 spines. The anterior superior spine is our key landmark for the front, then the posterior superior spine for the back. Below these are the anterior inferior spine and the posterior inferior spine. Just below those is the deep greater sciatic notch. Next, the ischium. This is the sitting bone. Look for the ischial spine, the ischial ramus, and the lesser sciatic notch. Then, the pubis. This is the most anterior part of the girdle. It consists of the pubic ramus and the pubic symphysis, where the 2 sides meet. Finally, locate the major openings. The acetabulum is the deep lateral socket where all 3 bones fuse to meet the femur. And the large opening at the base is the obturator foramen. If the acetabulum faces out and the anterior spines face forward, you have the correct anatomical position.
Now we move to the thigh, featuring the strongest bone in the body, the femur. First, locate the head. It articulates directly with the hip bone. On the head, look for the fovea capitis. This is a small pit where ligaments run to anchor the bone into the acetabulum. Below the head is the neck, a very common site for fractures. On the proximal end, identify the large greater trochanter and the smaller medial lesser trochanter. Key landmark. Look along the posterior shaft for the linea aspera. This ridge must face posteriorly to orient the bone correctly. Moving to the distal end, we have the large rounded surfaces, the lateral condyle and the medial condyle. Both of these articulate with the tibia. Just above them are the lateral epicondyle and the medial epicondyle. Finally, we have the patella, or the kneecap, which sits anterior to the femoral condyles. Remember, if the head is medial and that linea aspera ridge is in the back, you have found the anatomical position.
Now we move to the leg, which consists of the tibia and the fibula. First, the tibia, also known as your shin bone. At the proximal end, identify the lateral condyle and the medial condyle. On the anterior shaft, find the tibial tuberosity, the attachment point for your patellar ligament. Moving to the distal end, locate the medial malleolus. This is the large inner bulge of your ankle. Next, we have the fibula. Important note, this bone does not take part in the knee joint. At the top is the head, which articulates with the lateral condyle of the tibia. On the distal end of the fibula, locate the lateral malleolus. This forms the outer bulge of your ankle. Finally, look for the fibular notch on the tibia, where the two bones meet at the bottom. Remember, the tibia is medial and much larger, while the fibula is lateral and thin.
Finally, let's examine the foot. First, we have the 7 tarsal bones. To remember them, use the mnemonic, "Children that never march in line cry." Starting with the posterior bones, we have the calcaneus, which is your heel bone. Above that sits the talus. Moving to the anterior tarsals, we find the navicular, then the cuboid, and the 3 cuneiforms, the lateral cuneiform, the medial cuneiform, and the intermediate cuneiform. Next, we have the metatarsal bones, numbered 1 through 5. These lead into the phalanges, the 14 bones of the toes. Like the hand, each toe has a proximal, medial, and distal phalanx, except for the great toe, which lacks a medial phalanx. Lastly, observe the arches of the foot. The longitudinal arch, specifically the medial portion, is formed by the calcaneus, the talus, and the 3 medial metatarsals. And that concludes our tour of the appendicular skeleton. Great job today.
That's the appendicular skeleton. I hope these landmarks help you ace your exam. Don't forget to like and subscribe for our next anatomy lesson. Keep studying hard, and I'll see you next time.